chambers and just do that. The good thing is Isaiah 8 tonight is it's not as long, it's not as in depth, but we're going to cover it. But let me say, now next Wednesday night, we normally, what we hadn't done in the last 3 months, really, or 4, is our missions. And we have got to get back to missions. And we do that one Wednesday night a month. And next Wednesday night, Logan is preparing, she already had something partly prepared, but she's going to bring the missions update and what's going on. It'll be a good time for her because this February is, we do Alabaster in September, and we always say February, September. But it's Valentine's for Jesus. And while I think we weren't going to do dinners or whatever, spaghetti dinner sometime to do, we still have Valentine's for Jesus, and we'll probably put the little churches out for Alabaster and collection of change. But she'll share with you some of the things of what the Valentine's for Jesus is doing and what the other Alabaster from September had went to and what it was going to do. So those things, next Wednesday she will catch us up and try to do that. We were doing it once a month. We need to get back into this because on Sunday we're going to come back into Sunday school. We're back to Sunday school this Sunday at 8:45. And as we said, and I said something Sunday, invite people. We need people. We let our guard down, and you all about got a building out here that's going to have some stuff going on with it. And then you're going to have a building ready, and I expect that we'll be using it, not just for ourselves, but for young people. And that's where we start at. Trust me, we need young people. Amen.
Yeah, amen.
Amen. Somebody's got to fill the shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a pastor again one day. Somebody have to teach Sunday school. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need to keep it going, so we'll do that. But just be in prayer. Of course, I just remember I was talking to Darlene and Royce about Royce's dad, Paul. Just tend to pray for him. So he come down to the hospital looking for a bed and the rehab. Warren will arrange his family. Warren will have the memorial for him here at 2:00. Okay, it's 2:00 Saturday. We'll open the church at 12 for anybody that's going to come by and see the family or those that stays for the memorial. But it'll be at 2:00 Saturday here at the church. So remember that. 2:00 on Saturday here at the church. Who else? Remember Margaret's mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Walt's mother was 96. She has tested positive for COVID, and so is her daughter, Walt's sister. So we need to remember them. Dorothy Hood.
Still remember Jermaine?
Yeah.
They had to put her back on the vent.
Really?
Yeah, she got some kind of infection. So they had to put her back on the vent, so please pray for her. And also pray for Jermaine's brother, Matt. If y'all remember Matt. He had a heart attack. So he is in the hospital. I believe, I can't remember where they told me that he's at, but he's in the hospital. So remember their mom, of course, Joanne. Remember all that family. And I have a special to unspoken. And also still remember Tim Brock.
Yeah. Seen a picture of Tim where Tom seen Tom seen stuff. I never heard whether they haven't taken a scan of him.
I never heard. I heard they did it, but I didn't hear the results.
We'll put John. Talk good. Yeah.
They was showing to go tomorrow to the football and supposed to get cats off, so she went to get the food back from.
Okay.
And they was maybe she had to go today, your arm infused with her. She had to go back next week and another one.
She's still losing blood, or is she's still losing? Anybody else? Yes.
Very good, man. She got all kinds of problems. Yeah, he's got a figure down the procedure or something. She keeps up. She has this, get with it from where they got to keep something going back.
Back in the rhythm.
I'm gonna work with it. It's not a, they got nothing. Sympathy, sympathy or something like that.
All right.
I'll write his name when I forget. I forgot to write it. A girl I used to work with, a friend of mine, her name's Ricky Patsy. She is in the hospital right now. She just had a baby. But she's in the hospital, and they're gonna take her gallbladder out tomorrow. So remember her. Ricky Patsy,
We had her, she grew up, we had her for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, she's.
her mama Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa used to, she did the caravan program when we was doing the caravan.
2, 3 kids.
We had to have school bus go pick up kids
She
in.
just had another.
Did, had to have school bus in to pick up kids.
Her smallest one's probably just 2 weeks old. Her smallest one is probably just 2 weeks old.
Oh, and
2 or 3 weeks old, yeah, and she's got her surgery. So remember her.
she had, when she come here, she had heart problems.
She does.
She was young too, 13, 14 years old. All right, anybody else?
Tim Parker, he's going into his gallbladder surgery, he ate.
Billy?
My dad, he's on a treatment wall right now.
Remember Diane, she's not feeling good tonight, she's good.
Anybody else? All right, let's pray. Lord, tonight we just praise your name. We just lift your name and exalt it on high tonight. As we bring petitions before you, we just, first of all, we take time to just praise you. We'll lift your name up. Thank you for all that we have, Lord. Just ask you to forgive us of our shortcomings. Lord, as we bring petitions before you, it seems like that we ask and ask and ask. Maybe we should ask, what can we do for you? Tonight, there's these families that are hurting, these that have lost loved ones, and these with the COVID. And Lord, as we continue, as Jermaine, as she's went off the ventilator, now back on the ventilator, and for her brother man who's had a heart attack, for that family, Lord, just continue to just give them strength, Miss Joanne as well. Lord, for Lord's dad, Paul, continue to touch and to heal for Jesse as well. Shorty, as she goes back to the doctor, and for Mandy, and we'll just continue to help her. She has to take these iron and losing blood. And we'll just ask you to touch for Amanda, his daughter. Lord, if for whatever the situation is, Lord, that you ask you just to intervene and to help, to give them peace and calmness. Lord, for Ricky, as she's for surgery, Lord, I just pray you just help her. Lord, with those babies, and Lord, the family, and all come together and put it in your will. Lord, I know that you with Tim Parker, and so for Tim Brock, Lord, and tonight I pray that for Diane, she's not feeling well, Lord, just to continue to help and to give her a peace and healing. And for Lily's dad, as he now is, you know, would be traveling and in military and in business, Lord, you just continue to just hold safety about him, wrap your arms around him, watch over and protect him. Lord, tonight as we open your word again, I pray that you give us discernment and understanding. Your word, and everything we do be pleasing in your sight. In Christ's name, amen. I failed to mention, things like my wife. 2 nights ago, we had this thing goes on. If anybody knows about her kidney stone, it is. Yeah, her dad does. The last 2 times she's had them, we've had to call in demolitions expert and have them blasted. So, and me, I've been through this, and like I told her, I love you, but it's inevitable. I see what's coming. And she'll fight this. She got up the next morning and went to work. She come home. She went to bed last night early. Went back to work again today. And when it happens, well, I'll just be ready to start praying, because unless the good Lord intervenes and she can pass this, that's why she's not. You should feel bad this afternoon. She's going to be at home tonight. But just pray, lift her up. She's still working. Now, she's tougher than I am. Most of y'all know that. They can. Yeah. She's been with Path Group now for I don't know how many years. She never called in sick. Her boss made her leave one time, took her to the hospital because she had kidney stones. I do remember, I see that, down with you. Remember Jerry, he's on the road and having travel. He's seeing all kinds of weather, I'm sure, scattered across New Mexico, California, wherever else. Sometimes he comes all the way back and goes to Pennsylvania and then comes home. So it's, remember, he's there for
I failed to ask for prayer for Brother Bill Welch and Joy, but I talked to him just, I believe it was yesterday. He's doing much better. Sister Joy, she's doing a whole lot better. She's back at work now. And, yes, both of them had it. And Miss Joy was in worse shape than Brother Bill was. She was sicker than he was, but both of them seem to be doing all right. So, get an opportunity. Jesse's living up here. Jesse's living in Brother Welch's. As a matter of fact, I guess he bought that house off of Brother Welch. He's married now. Oh, you Jesse? Oh, yeah. And Brother Bill and Joy just tickled to death with the young lady that he married. I remember she's an apple in third eye anyway. Well, Jesse's smart enough. He probably got it. Yes.
She was a martyr.
Martin.
Yeah.
Martin.
I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, you do.
But the Holy Spirit talked to me Sunday.
Yeah.
And I meant to say something to you Sunday night about it. What would you think about, like, me taking Alec and Megan and, out here? One day, Chloe, to see, Dawn and Shell up there.
Like I said earlier, when somebody's gonna do something that's gonna help somebody, yeah, you go ahead.
Do you think they would like
Yeah, they will.
Is the Holy Spirit talking to you? Did you
that?
stop?
Yeah.
Step down, next case.
Yeah. That'd be great. That's a good idea. But I always say it, and I delegate anyway. That's what I'm trying to do. Joe says I do
You
that.
just tell me when, I can get with Shella and find out
I'll give you phone number.
when would be a good time.
I'll give you phone number. 2944, 2946.
Of course, we'll wear masks, I won't be around. Take a chance to give it to something.
I did tell this, Stuart Orrell, I got Stuart Orrell. We know Stuart, Stuart, yeah. Look here, Stuart from across the pond, who I stayed with, some of his family, that's him and Helen. Of course, Helen came here when he preached here once before when he was in the States. Now, his wife, Helen, has been diagnosed with cancer. Now, it's awful. It is not on the brain. It is cancer that is between, the way I took it from him when he sent me the email back, it is between, it's on the skull, between the scalp and the skull, and it is awful. So, that's, if there's any good side to it. But yeah, and Stuart, we will probably get him at the end of April for a revival. Maybe about 4 days while we have. We do remember, Miss Helen. She's a wonderful people.
We're going to page 650. If someone would like to take up the offering. Oh, would you care to ask a question on the offering?
Lord, thank you, dear Lord. Thank you for your love we ever have now, Lord. Lord, we would all pray for you to serve them out of a particular special way, Lord. You pass the resurrection, the adoration, Lord, in your first name.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a happy will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of Him in glory will unfold the lofty way. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout victory. Onward to the prize before us, soon His beauty will behold. Soon the pearly gates will open, we shall tread the streets of gold. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout victory. Amen.
Love that song.
All right, in this, 8th chapter here, next week, of course, we will not be in here, and then the following week after that, which will probably be the 16th, we're going to look at chapter 9. Now, of course, I don't think we're going to be able to do the entire book of Isaiah, because we're going to stay on it for over 2 years if we're doing it chapter by chapter. But, and just in prayer, and I think when we get through chapter 9, it's also the promise of the Messiah, and we look at a few verses there, and then we're going to conclude it for that time being, and I think we're going to move on to something. I would like to go into something of the New Testament with Jesus' time and look and see what He has dealt to us, especially in the calling of His disciples. So that might be something that we see by the end of February that we get into when we start March and look at that for just a few weeks. But as we look at this tonight, we look at one, I look at the commentary, announcement of judgment. We can look at that for tonight out of Isaiah chapter 8. I use a little Charles Spurgeon and some of John MacArthur's as well. And of course, Matthew Henry, just looking at different ones to look and see. And they're kind of close on things. But the thing is, I could say this with Isaiah. When I look at this and we read at the beginning of this, he's trying his best to get these people to listen to what God's telling them. Even he knows that what's happening and what he sees them turning. Because at the end of this chapter, you'll see him give warnings, because you're going to talk a little bit, it uses the word ghost, but when you look at the old writing, they're talking about sorcerers and palm readers, whatever you want to call them, things of that nature. That's what the people are looking for, everything for help except God. And they're going to kind of turn on Isaiah through this chapter, because his reliance is what he's given us. this chapter would preach to us is who we are today about who we rely on. Do we rely on God fully, or do we look for outside sources to help us get to the place we need to be spiritually, socially, and community, whatever it is, instead of relying on God to fulfill all things? And that preaches in itself, but it's a full reliance on God, and we'll get to a few of those. But I want to read in the opening. Moreover, the Lord said to me, take a large scroll and write on it with a man's pen concerning. And when I started, I got into some of this, and Hashbaz is what one, and they narrowed it down to that, but it's Maed Shalah Ashbaz. That is the name that he gives the son, of course. And I will take for myself faithful witnesses to record Uriah, the priest, and Zechariah, Seberechiah, he's the son of Seberechiah. Now, these two witnesses here in this, when he's opening this in the second verse, when he's talking about taking these witnesses, this is because he's come to a place where he's going to write down, and it says a large tablet. Now, the sign of the prophet's unborn son is in these first 4 verses. That's going to be the main thing. But it's also this, it's better translated a large tablet. He says a man's pen. It properly designates common Hebrew characters. It's ancient people wrote on the clay tablets, later upon wood, metal, or stone, which had been covered with wax so that it would show up. So when he told him to take this, it was basically take a large tablet. That's what he was telling him to take. The reason for this, that he told him to write it down, and he's bringing 2 witnesses here, is he's bringing these to us, and he says Uriah, probably the high priest at that time, and even says Zechariah, of course, was probably the father of the queen. So they can't determine it, but that's kind of what I picked up from 2 different ones. But this is who he wants there, because the people will see them as a faithful witness. It's like they were there when it happened. And what he's doing is he's writing this for a reason. So that what he's writing on here basically is a prophecy of what's coming. And what the witness is there for is pretty much the authenticity of it would be, oh, well, he wrote that when it started happening. No, he's writing it right now. Okay. When he's writing it, the 2 witnesses he calls here, Uriah and Zechariah and Uriah, because they're faithful witnesses, people are going to believe them. And he wants to write it now to show them that this is going to happen. What he's trying to do is get them to rely on God fully. And if he can show them through faithful witnesses, somebody that testifies, gives testimony that this is when he wrote it, then it's going to maybe make them believe a little more. He's trying desperately to help these people. And they basically, what you get out of chapter 8 is they're just not going to do it. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I had a conversation with Joe today. We talked about the gentleman that was sitting on the porch when the water rose to the top of the porch, and they came by in the car to pick him up, and they wouldn't go. And then there'd be an army truck, and he wouldn't go. And he said, the Lord will take care of me. You know the story. He gets all the way to the end. He's on the rooftop. The helicopter comes, and the Lord will take care of me. God's got this. Well, of course, he drowned. Asked God, why'd you let me drown? He said, wait a minute. I said, car, truck, boat, helicopter, and you didn't take my help. See, we think that sometimes other people can't help. So Isaiah being the prophet, he's in the middle between God and the people. Forget about the king. Forget about the king. We're talking about between God and the people is Isaiah. And what he's trying to give them is what God's telling them, because they're not listening. And sometimes that's what we all need. We need somebody that is of a complete faithful spirit that's listening to God. And when we ask people to pray for us, and we ask for specific people, pray for me, I need help with this or whatever, it's either it's in confidence or it's accountability partners that we have sometimes, whatever it is. Somebody between you and God who is that can give you the truth. Isaiah was giving the truth. That's why he wanted it written down on the tablets with these testimonies of these 2 great witnesses that would be faithful witnesses to tell them. The signature of these 2 notaries as to the date of the prediction would validate it also and gain public attention for it. So this is big. He knows this is what he wanted to do. Now, verse 3, says, then I went to the prophetess. He calls his wife the prophetess. Now, whether or not we said before didn't have a name, Ron Brandt was here. Ron Brandt was in the Salvation Army. Okay, he worked in the Salvation Army. Okay, in the Salvation Army, if a man has a title, the woman is equal to that title he had. So that's kind of what it is. So they call her the prophetess, because she was the prophet. And it says, then I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. For before the child, he says, can have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Syria. Okay, remember, he's moved to Assyria now for Tilazar. Tilazar, if I get that right. I'll jump in here anytime. Because here's what he's doing as we get down here into verse 4, and he says, before this child can even do that, you got to remember something. This is what he's writing. Okay? And of course, 9 months later, the son is born, and from everything I could find, there is the 9 month of the pregnancy, and then there is about 1 year, which would be about right. Which I know with Neelan, he's 13 months old. Okay. And at about a year old, he was starting to holler for mom, dad, and do all. So this is probably when the writing takes place. They're about a year and a half away from this happening, this prophecy. He's trying to give these people notice, and it's for sure about a year and a half. Because when he's taken and writing this, before the child will be old enough to cry for mom or dad, mother or father, what's happening is that would be about a year, and now he's just now going to his wife, and she's going to conceive a son. So you figured up a year and 9 months, roughly. So at least a year and a half that before this prophecy is fulfilling or taking place. When he gets into verse 5, the Lord also spoke to me again, saying, now in reading this, if you're just reading through it, you get to thinking about flood coming. Okay, that's in our sight. We see this. It says, inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloh that flow softly and rejoice in Rezin and Remel, a son, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria and his glory. He will go up over all his channels and go over his banks. He will pass through Judah. He will overflow and pass over. He will reach up to the neck, and the stretching out his wings, he will feel the breath of your land, O Emmanuel. Now, in reading this, he's describing an overflowing of the banks of the water. What he's doing, he's using this is giving an example of what's going to happen, how this king is going to overtake him. Right? When he talks about the neck, of course, and he goes up to the neck, what he's saying there is it's like a man. If a man's drowning, or man's not, he's in the water and he goes up to his neck, he's close to drowning, pretty close. Well, what's happening here? He's going to say the waters are going to come in, going to overtake him. This is, they said in Shiloh, the actual, as a little side note, Psalms 46 speaks of Shiloh being God. I'm not sure how he does it. It's more of a singing. In Psalm 46, I think it sings more to Shiloh, the waters, and talking about God in it. That meaning God in it with the water. And this is in verses 5 through 8 here. It says Shiloh versus the Euphrates in the waters. It says the Lord spoke again and again suggests the way Isaiah piled divine oracles one upon another. God's instrument of judgment now is pictured as flooding waters and irresistible disaster. That's what he's given them, the expression of the disaster that's coming their way. He's trying to keep telling them over and over about this, and they're going to see this disaster. The pool of Shiloh, which Shiloh was not really a large body of water. It wasn't that big. It was more of a stream, a large stream. Because we would see it more as a great big river, which it was not. But the pool of Shiloh is a large reservoir in the Ephraim Valley, southeast of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. It is supplied with water. by Hezekiah's tunnel, which is a narrow conduit cut through the limestone rock. And get this, these people we think about how they used to do things back so many years ago. In concrete, I think, how did they make them? They're pretty sharp, you know, they had ways. I wish we could understand fully what they were doing. But this tunnel, it's called With Water by Hezekiah's Tunnel, is a narrow conduit cut through the limestone rock for a distance of 1,750 feet. That's a third of a mile. Whew. That's interesting. We're talking, what are we talking now? 2,700 years ago. Well, you start thinking about it. When Greg Meach has got that machine that drills under creeks and stuff, you know, for water systems, put the pipes and everything in. We can talk about none of that. So when you start talking about it, this is a tunnel. It's basically a conduit. It's through the limestone rock at 1,750 feet. That's a third of a mile. I mean, that's probably just over a third, almost 4/10 of a mile. It says, the gentle flow of these waters is contrasted with the surging and overflowing of the river, the Euphrates, mentioned in verse 7, which takes its course from the mountains of Turkey and flows down across what is modern Iraq. So it gives you an idea about the area that we're talking about. When everything you get to reading, and we get to the end of this story in Revelation, and people start, what is modern day? Sometimes it does us good to go back and look at where we're talking about these people are then compared to what modern day is. So, I mean, it helps me understand it. Most of the time I look back and I say, oh, okay, yeah. Because you can just get a geographical picture about where it is, and it helps us know where it's at geographically. But as he is catching up to this, and where we're at in the first 8 verses, of course, is what he had written upon the tablets was afterwards taking place. That they would know it was fulfilled, and it was written by Isaiah from God to help them even after the destruction that's coming in the future, and of course taking the king also out. The only thing I can get out of this, when it talks about the Assyrian king, Ahaz hired him to help. Okay? He's going to destroy the other 2. But basically, in that day, when you hired that king and his army to help you, you basically are going to be the last one on the list. Because he's pretty well going to capture or kill people and do whatever, and you hired him, but you're going to be the last one on his list. Because if he can destroy these others, he can destroy you too. You got to remember, the kings of that time were ruthless. For the most part. The only good thing we know from Ahaz is he fathered Hezekiah. Because Hezekiah was a good king, as he follows here later on in the years to come. But you can always remember, we used that a couple of weeks ago when we said that. Now,
Usually these names in the Bible, they mean something.
yes.
Mahalaspah. Did you look it up, or where they come up with the name?
Well, that when his son was here, and I went to that one, I had him, and I got to that pronunciation thing, and of course he actually called it Mahed Shalah Ashbaz, and of course when he does that, it is speedy to the spoil, hurry to the plunder. Speedy to the spoil, hurry to the plunder. Of course, the plunder would be of Samaria and Damascus by the Assyrian king. But that's what it says. That his name, as it gives you that. I'm thinking that when you first hear about his name,
I didn't look it up.
yeah, in the first part of Isaiah, it gives you. Of course, we know that with the second, this is the second son, if I'm thinking correctly. Yes, and the first son was a remnant will return. Okay, that was the meaning of his name. Of course, in these 2. Now, no. All right, I'm gonna read verse 9. I'm gonna get 9 and go down to maybe to 14 here. And I want to divide it in kind of 3 sections. Verse 9 says, and be shattered, O you people, and be broken in pieces. Give ear, all you from far countries. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. He repeats it. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, but it will come to be nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Now, fear God above any human conspiracies. Now, this conspiracy thing, of course, in looking in this, in the conspiracies, I want to read a little bit from the study Bible. And he says conspiracies, we're going to get down into 12. I want to hold off on that just a minute. It says, those who gird, it says, themselves against the Lord must surely come to God's narration. Even the cleverest plans against God causes come to naught. It's not going to work. You can plan things against God. It's not going to work. You won't defeat God. Not going to do it. The Lord spoke to Isaiah firmly, instructing him not to walk in the way of his people. This is in 10. He says, take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. When he's writing this in verse 11, I want to say, for the Lord spoke thus to me with a strong hand. This is when I think he's ready to maybe chastise and look at Isaiah and say, this is what I want you to do now. Pay close attention. Don't mess this up. And he says, for the Lord spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. Now, reason is distance. He's actually telling him, when I read this under the study Bible, in verse 11, he's actually saying, distance yourself from the people you minister. That's kind of, for me, would be confusing. You look at it, distance yourself from the people you minister. And it's not about distancing himself from them, but from what they are implying and what they're trying to do. So see, this is why he brings up this word in verse 12. Do not say a conspiracy concerning all these people have called a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. They're hollering conspiracy. And I want to tell you about the word conspiracy. This is what happened. When we think of prophets, you got to remember, we go all the way to the end of Isaiah's life. Remember what happened to him? He's a martyr. He's sawed in half. Some say it was a wooden saw. Sawed in half. I mean, that's pretty bad. And when I didn't used to know what this was, I decided I watched some of these older movies. And they said this, and they said, we'll have you drawn and quartered. Y'all know what drawn and quartered is? It's when they had, I seen this on one of them movies. I got into watching one of them jobs, and I tell you, because you want to see how the church was, they separated them out. Drawn and quartered. They had 4 horses. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what they done, is they draw you out with 4 horses, and they quarter you. Basically, they pull and you come apart. That was one of the.
That'd be cruel.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'll tell you what. Now
That's leave mark.
we leave a mark for sure. But drawn and quartered. That was kind of what they were doing. The king was doing. One of the kings I would watch there about how he had done it. This was in the 9th, 10th, 11th century, probably. And that's how they did it. Drawn and quartered. So he was going to the saw. You got to get to it. This is what actually, some of the people, they would think this are the prophets because it didn't go along with what they wanted. It ain't no different than today. Folks, it ain't. We've got people all the time going against what God's word says because they say it doesn't fit right. So they want to go against it. And they can look at the prophecies that come within the Bible and then read about them, and then they have to come up with a conclusion that says, wait a minute. This is just a story that's written. Well, no, it's not. If you do the right. If you calculate it right and read it right, it's not just a story that was written. It's the greatest love story ever written. But these writings have been, it's authenticated. The writings was from this age group, of course, as you go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But on the conspiracy thing is, this is how it was. Many in Israel considered, this is it, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and other prophets to be servants of the enemy when they advocated a policy of non-reliance on foreign powers. This is what they thought of it. And complete dependence on the Lord alone. They did not, non-reliance, they didn't want to rely on foreign powers. They only wanted to rely on God alone. That's what a prophet does. He listens to God. Even in Ahaz's situation, remember when he went to him to tell him, and he was like, yeah, he'd already talked to the king of Syria. Of course, he's got plans. I'm going to hire you to help me. And that's what he was doing. But that's why even the people of Israel considered that Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even the other prophets were servants of the enemy, because these people are screaming out like this: we need help. If these two armies come after us, basically was what was happening leading up to this point. If these two armies come after us, we can't defend them. Now, in modern time, if you look at it, where we're at today, look at what Ukraine and Russia. Notice, a little bit of research will show you that if you take Russia and Ukraine will not withstand Russia as an army, as a force. There is just no way. Okay, and my personal opinion, this is not a political platform by no means, but my personal opinion is Putin is just testing the waters. He's going to see what he can do. He's put 100,000 men on the border, But when Israel is here in the times of their need, they're looking and saying, well, they're just going to wipe us out. We need all the help we can get. You need to be behind the king. Well, this is another time when we're talking about Isaiah was, we call him ruthless. He wasn't ruthless because he didn't have the power to be ruthless, or he wouldn't have never went after somebody else, and he relied on God. And he wouldn't do it. So Ahaz is non-reliance on God, but the people are trying to get as a conspiracy. They think that he's favored. He's not favoring what should be done. People are telling him that. He says that's one of the reasons why they didn't care much for him when going got tough. And in these verses that follow, it says, I read off of through 12 in the conspiracy. Verse 13, the Lord of hosts, him shall hallow. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. This is what Isaiah said. And it says, he will be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And he talks about this. He says, many shall stumble. Another prediction anticipated the stumbling of Israel, which included her rejection of her Messiah. Okay, we all know that from Jews down the road as we go, they're going to reject the Messiah when the Messiah comes anyway. So this has got long-term standing through most of this. And it says also in that previous in 14 about both the houses of Israel. Of course, they will be collapsed under the return of the Messiah to the new earth when he restores. They'll collapse, not be restored until the Messiah comes. And then verse 15 says, and many among them shall stumble, they shall fall and be broken, be snared and taken. It says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. Now, when I got into this, he actually gave this writing to his disciples. He had some disciples that took notes and kept up with it. It says, the God of hosts should be man's proper objective of dread, not any human conspiracy. Thus, Isaiah warned against being swept into a panic by popular fears. These are people that's running and panicking, and they're trying to get everybody to just be in fear. We need all the help we can get. You're going to wind up being a slave to somebody in that particular time, in time. God will be either our sanctuary or our stone of stumbling. I had to keep looking at that because God's not a stumbling stone or a block, I think. Israel and Jerusalem will trip and fall because of their misdirected fears. They will be trapped and taken like an animal in a snare. That's why he gives this for the snare. They're going to be easily taken. And this is just for the simple reason, as you get deeper into this, we come back to the same conclusion. Why would they not listen to Isaiah? We read the story of how it happened and everything took place. And then, of course, for us reading it now, this 2,700 years later, going, these people should have known better. Isaiah tried to tell them, well, what they try to tell us. As we get to the end of time, we keep hearing that time is near, time is near. My goodness, do you think there'll be writing and notes taken when this end of time comes? Of course there will be. Well, someone says, when this world ends, will God create another? Y'all ever thought about that? What do you think? What do you think?
Or does it not say that you have and earth?
But the new heaven and new earth is where he comes down out of Jerusalem. We talked about that in Revelation. But we're talking about in the new heaven and the new earth, he can go out there and create whatever he wants to. He can.
Yeah,
Do whatever you
Do
want.
whatever he wants.
or you can do one there.
I keep thinking about the questions that Mamie and I reminded her tonight. She can work Sunday. We will get to that. We get about the people and the creation. Did he create more? Did he curse someone? Because that's why we have a dark-skinned person, and things that there's a lot of questions about God can do anything he wants. He is the Almighty, and he knows best for all people. But Isaiah is taking the notes from the Almighty. That's something as a prophet. You're hearing the word. You're not hearing a word, and you're not reading someone's writing. You're hearing from the Almighty. And this is what you have to do, people. And they're going, wait a minute. Their fear is in the wrong place. Because they're fearing man is what's happening. It says, and when he says, and I started reading here in 16 and stuff, when he started saying this, bind up the testimony, seal the law among the disciples, and I will wait on the Lord, who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Verse 18, here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs. He's talking about his two sons that's given to him and given his signs. It says, we are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. God's man can wait. Isaiah ordered the testimony, the oracle, to be written and deposited with his disciples. He then expressed his willingness to await God's vindication of this prophecy. That was in 17. In 18, he reminded all that he and his family constituted God's signs to Israel, each of them with a significant and symbolic name, both sons for a reason. And this is coming. He's a prophet. He's giving everything, his family, everything. The same thing happened to Isaiah as to Amos and Jeremiah. Whenever the prophets were at all the zealous in their opposition to the appeal for foreign aid, they were accused and branded as standing in the service of the enemy and conspiring for the overthrow of the king. Okay? So I read you earlier about when they talked about Jeremiah and Isaiah, what they thought of it. It's because Isaiah, of course, once I said, he is able to get into the court. He's able to talk to the king. He has access. But he has evidently shown his frustration and his displeasure with King Ahaz openly. Okay, you got to remember, there's some friction I think we're not going to get to read within the scriptures and even in some of the commentaries. There's this friction that happened between Ahaz and Isaiah. When it started, it never stopped. I think in my opinion, it grew pretty bad at one time here because that's in what we're reading, what he was saying. He says, as he gets into this in verses 19, in these last few verses, he talks to him about what he doesn't want him to do. But I know that the people are starting a charge against Isaiah, and he's looking to once again give them every possible means. I think he's writing this and keeping it, handing to his disciples. He's having witnesses to what he's writing. It is not just for the here and now. It's for later. The remnant will return. His first son, named that for a reason. Because when they return out of captivity, they're going to have this to go back to and say, there's his faithful witnesses. He had witnessed this. It's their testimony. He predicted this through God, telling him, if we now look where we're at, and all these years later, you got to remember, after a captivity, they come out when they went to Babylon 70 years. But if they go back and look at some kind of writings after they've been captive and then they return, they say, we never want to do that again. We don't want to take our children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren. We don't want them to have to go through this. So what we have to do is we have to start not just coming to a conclusion. We have to come to a place of just repentance and obeying God through the prophets. And so this writing was for here and now, but the seriousness of it will be for down the road when people open it up and say, yeah, here it is. He told them they didn't believe it. And of course, I think after captivity and they come back, that's what will make Israel and it'll make these people the strong people when they come out of captivity, the strong people of faith first, because their spiritual walk is going to be enhanced tremendously because of where they were listening to the prophets as they wrote to them. But unfortunately, if we read history, it's going to repeat itself again. And you think, what causes that? So there's always a fall. Even when we do some of the best things that we do, I mean, we live in a democracy right now, and our democracy is on life support. I say that because if you look at, remember you give me a paper. Remember that time on the research of democracy, it was what they did over the course of our time. When you look back at democracies, the average age for them was like 175 or something. It was less than 200 years. I think it was 175. One place had an average of 185 years. If we go back to ours, and where are we at now? Oh my goodness, we're 246 years this year, 246. So if we're looking at an average of 175, 185 years in a democracy, they fall. We're living in one of the longest democracies. So,
Those people trying to destroy it.
yeah. See, but if we trust God and say, we're maybe not listening to what God's telling us.
That's all the hope of you.
That's
Christian.
yeah. The Christians is the only thing I really believe that the Christians, as Christians, we're the only things holding it together. Now, if Isaiah had these other people, so most of these people that went against him here, they started talking about a conspiracy and how he was trying to overthrow the king and not relying on the people that could really help him, which was man and armies. And said, rely just on God. It's not getting us anywhere. But sometimes, we don't have patience. We don't have patience to wait on God to help in the situations that we're in, and we reach and grasp for things that are not real and they're not vital to us spiritually. When it comes to the end of it, it's about a spiritual walk anyway. Because we're not supposed to fall in love with this world because it's not going to last anyway. But for us, we talk about lifetimes. We start talking about lifetimes, and lifetimes are lifetimes. That's it. They're a time. We're in a time now that we have to look and see what God can do for us. He resembles us a lot, not just from the first 4 or 5 chapters of Isaiah as we get into this. As we get into verse 19 real quick, we want to look at where he was at. It says, and then they say to you, seek those who are mediums, it's talking about sorcerers, whatever, and wizards who whisper and mutter. Should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? Going to seances, Anybody ever been to a seance? Anybody ever been to a seance?
Ain't going in.
Hey, I had
Maybe when I was a kid, maybe kids sit around and go,
Oh, yeah.
and turn off.
Yeah.
well, I tell you what, I met somebody when I was living in Murfreesboro. It was a girl and her aunt held a seance. We were running that sports bar then. I sure was living on the wrong side. Thank God he was watching over. But I'm going to tell you something. I told Brooks, I said, I'm not going. I got more sense than that. I'm not going. It's me and he. She had invited us to go because her aunt, they hold seance and stuff. I may be stupid, but I ain't that stupid. But you just think these people, they're calling everybody in now. You know what I'm saying? They're calling. When verse 19 says, seek those that are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter. Should not the people seek their God? They're talking about all kinds of things they're worshiping here other than God. This is why they weren't supposed to get into the country anyway. Okay? They're foreign gods is what he called them. Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? Just as Jesus told the young man when he said, come follow me, he said, well, my father has died, let me bury him. And he said, you let the dead bury the dead. Someone says that's cold, and you listen, that's what Jesus said. You let the dead bury the dead. You concern yourself with the living are the ones that you can help when it comes to eternity. folks, none of us, I don't care, you go back to the Roman Catholic Church from years and years ago, when Martin Luther was there, when he split the church in the early 1500s, that's why, because it was paying indulgences to try to get grandma to heaven. We've been dead for 50 years, that's not right. It's based upon who we are now. But you can't do that on behalf of the to the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Talking about complete darkness now. They will pass through it, hard pressed and hungry, and it shall happen. When they are hungry, they will be enraged and curse their king and their God and look up. Then they will look to the earth and see trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness. He's talking about complete darkness. They are completely lost. It says the fortune teller versus God's word. Should not a people seek unto their God? Let me tell you something. If we believe that there's one God, and Isaiah was listening to the one God, the rest of this is all void. No, there's nobody else is going to help like God can. With this question, Isaiah warns his disciples against consulting spirit mediums that whisper and mutter. To consult the dead for the sake of the living is to forsake the dawn, the light for darkness. Let men consult the law and testimony. That's what is written, of course. The message and the counsel of God. And then rejecting the rejection of the divine revelation is preference for the fortune telling, which brings only famine and blasphemy. Not only are they rejecting what the prophet is writing to them and giving them, they're going to seek out these. I mean, I'm not the judge, but is that blasphemy to God? Because he says, this is what I want you to do. And we're going to go get people that hold seances and all kinds of these mediums and fortune tellers and all this stuff. And they're still going to do it. And that's why at the end of this, he says, it's going to only bring famine and blasphemy. But I mean, my goodness, that's desolate. You become desolate when you're searching for something other than the God that's before you through the prophet. And it would be nice if Isaiah could come to us and say, okay, this is what God has asked you all to do. You're a people that can make a difference in what your world is at today. I mean, of course we would. If he sent Isaiah here, I mean, most of them would probably pass out. But we could ask a lot of questions, but he would have all the questions. He's already been in the president. Had the anointing. As Isaiah was, he wasn't siding with the king, and of course this is what gets him in trouble. If you'll notice, I don't know the number of years between this where he's at, getting close to the destruction here from the Assyrian king. I don't know how many years is there from there to his death. That was the one thing I meant to look and find out for sure. But it is some years, because I'm not sure. And to be honest with you, I run into one kind of commentary, and I never heard the name before, but it said that Isaiah had 3 sons. and they took chapter 7, and they put, of course, we know that the last son, if you will, and the last son, of course, we had called him, we just named him Hashbaz. But what had happened is they had said that the middle son was named Emmanuel. God with us. Remember when he was talking about the young woman conceiving? That's what he was talking about. But we know that not to be true, because that was not the Messiah or Emmanuel. They were trying to say that someone else may have had the baby or whatever, his figure of speech. But Isaiah, the best of my, did not have the first child. The second child was called Emmanuel, God with us, of course. And then this last one. I didn't find that, and I still haven't found anything that's going to make me believe that he had anything other than those 2 sons. I did find out, look, where maybe his first wife had passed, and he married a much younger lady than had the second child. So I'm thinking that when he's getting to this age, it may not be too far from of him being marked. So, because we're not in chronological order, right? That's what a lot of people get confused, is when they start reading the Bible and they go from, they open it up in Genesis and you go to all the way to Revelations. Well, that's not even the four gospels. Some people, they do that, and it does cause mass confusion sometimes because they read it. That's why we refer back to a lot of the Isaiah writing here in the first few chapters. You go back into 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, about the king and so forth. That's why it's not in chronological order. So that's one thing. We don't want to make to make the assumption and do. Okay, the chapter 8 is pretty much just, I would think that is Isaiah becoming frustrating for people and saying, my goodness, you know, if we didn't lay this road, you go out there in the middle of it and you say, what are you all doing? You, for those of you that don't perish, you're going to see the two kings that's coming after you. You're not going to do it. I've been told you that. Now you're going to see it. Now I've written it down. You're going to have to start believing me here. And then when he gets to the end of the chapter, they call in mediums and fortune tellers and all kinds of stuff. And it's just for him, you know, he would just want to just grab them and say, why are you doing this? God says for you to trust me. And that's the whole thing of chapter 8, was they just would not trust God in the sense that they were saying, you know what, we need help now. And we do that to God sometimes, I know. Sarah Jason was the first remnant shall return. And but you know, if we listen to what God tells us, if we listen the first time, we have a lot less pain. But if we continue to obey Him, we also have a lot less pain. So when we're hard-headed, we suffer. When we get off track, we suffer. And that's basically what happens. It's the same thing happens, and it's not because we don't have the prophets with us anymore. We do have the prophets with us because Isaiah is the first, and to me, one of the best here, because his writings were even kept, and of course we know the story of being authenticated when they come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So he's right. Yes.
Pastor, Shirley sent this through, Remind. She wants everybody to remember her sister Esther, that she's been admitted with a temperature of 103, that she's had for 2 days. She said that she's run a fever of 101 for the past 30 days. Pray that they find out what's causing the fever, that it's not an infectious disease. There is not an infectious disease available at this time. They're on vacation. Thanks, Shirley.
Maybe it's for Shirley Share. Right. Yeah, Shirley Share.
She was sister Esther, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was assuming. Shirley.
This is Esther. All right, and remember those that we mentioned tonight. Next week, we will be missions. We'll do that. Logan's got some stuff to read for, of course, we're in Valentine's for Jesus. We want to go on there and catch up on stuff that we've had up to this point. So she should have enough material to get us back on track. We need that. And then we'll try to do it on the second Wednesday of each month. We need to be back to what normal. Sunday morning, 8:45, we're back to Sunday school. Back to that. Sunday nights, we're going to look at and see what we can get. We do know that, remember what's February 20th at 5 p.m., they're having the community singing. The singing believers will be up there, and they'll have a meal afterwards. And invite anybody who wants to come bring a covered dish. So I talked to them again. That's
Where's this at?
Door Methodist. Door Methodist, and that's on the 20th. They asked. Of course, we're waiting after that for a Sunday night start back for us anyway. That way we wouldn't start and stop or anything. We'll march and see what it goes for us.
Saturday for the warm, right?
Yes, and 2 p.m. on Saturday is Warren Lorenzi's memorial. And just pray for that family and pray for Maggie. She's she holds the prayer attorney and she's been with her pop down there, and I think she's she's done best good. He's at home, she's asked us to do that. We pray for me and Jonathan Moore and asked both of us to have part of that memorial service. And we'll do that. And there won't be food afterwards. And what will happen is we'll supply them with donuts and coffee and just a few sandwiches made up down there between 12 and 2. The families here, people will go down and have a cup of coffee, have a sandwich or something. That's fine. We will not have any food gatherings afterwards. So we'll put that back in. Okay. I appreciate you all very much. Stay dry and stay warm, and we'll just pray that the good Lord keeps all the ice that way. Okay, you have to have it keep that way.
You really think the pig,
I haven't heard tomorrow, but as far as I know, they're still having everything tomorrow. But she gave me a message, and I did Shirley sent that to me too as well. I wanted to be mine. There is no, make sure before we leave here. The other ones that I should cancel that, I'll make sure. No. Everything is 2:00 tomorrow. 2:00 tomorrow is the extended Sunday school class downstairs. So it's staying right on. Okay. Good. I appreciate you all very much. We'll probably come back on this next week, of course, missions week today, the 16th. If we come back and look at chapter 9, and then we'll probably fall into something, and we'll take that, maybe move into Jesus, into the 4 Gospels and the time he's picking his disciples. Give us a little bit of something to go back from one to the other. So, okay? Thank you all very much. Lord, I thank you tonight that you give us scripture. We look at it, Lord. There's a time that we look in so many hundreds of years ago that Isaiah was taking direct word from you to help the people, Lord. And today we look at your scriptures and, Lord, may we keep applying it to our life. Lord, to open and consume it, live by it, apply it. Lord, there is so much that you can give us just through your word, even in today. Many may think that it's not applying to us, but it is so much applying to us in this very day. I pray that you send your mightiest of angels